All right, so panel 2, so we're now moving through the progression of Duchenne and Becker. And panel 2 is going to focus on the tween and teen years. So this is really middle and high school. And in this panel, in the discussion, and you'll hear this in the testimony, as the testimony was coming in, the testimony was really starting to, some of the themes we heard at the end of the last testimony, but as we're moving into teen and tween years, we're really going to start to talk about the psychological impact of transitions that are experienced at this time. We'll continue exploring navigating clinical care and therapeutic options, clinical trial availability and decision-making around treatments and clinical trials, but then also access to resources. And now as our young people in this age group are transitioning into being non-ambulatory, some of the new resources that are then layered in to that, and then peer relations, because these are teens and tweens, and that becomes increasingly important. So let's start with Carla Kramer.
Thanks, Annie. Good morning. My name is Carla Kramer, together with my husband, Dave. We are raising our 12-year-old son, Lucas, who has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We live here locally in Silver Spring, Maryland, and it's good to be with you here today. Our Duchenne journey began when Lucas was diagnosed in September 2009 at age 4. Prior to the diagnosis, several things had happened to alert us that something was not quite normal. He missed many milestones. He never crawled. He did not walk until 18 months. He never ran, and he began falling down a lot. Then around age 4, he got the flu, and his physical weakness was considerable. That's when the testing really began. Prior to diagnosis, I had taken Lucas on a trip to Spain for a month. However, what should have been a happy and carefree month in Spain was punctuated by confusion and frustration. Confusion because I couldn't understand why he was falling all the time. Frustration because I thought he complained too much about his legs being tired. Despite what happened in Spain, a week after returning home, I was not at all prepared to receive the news that Lucas had muscular dystrophy, and thus our new reality hit home. Fast forward 8.5 years later, and I sit before you today with so much hope for the future. At almost 13 years old, Lucas is still walking, which is not always true for Duchenne boys by his age. He is a very social and well-adjusted 7th grader with many friends and a penchant for finding humor in all things. He's also the most food-motivated person I know. Case in point, his Make-A-Wish Foundation wish was to travel to Thailand to eat spicy Thai food. You can see the photo, that's from Thailand of him in the water. For Lucas, living with Duchenne is all that he knows, but it means that as his peers are hitting puberty and growing taller, he stays almost the same height. He notices that and he worries about being so short. Living with Duchenne means that playdates with friends are mostly at our house, since it's accessible when most friends' homes are not. Living with Duchenne means when he goes to Six Flags, he worries his friends will leave him behind since he can't keep up. Living with Duchenne means that when Lucas was in 1st grade, one of his classmates would not sit next to him because he was afraid Lucas's muscular dystrophy was catching. Living with Duchenne means having a kid at his middle school tell him she felt really sad for him because he would die soon. Living with Duchenne means that we go on vacation or visit out of town. When we go on vacation or visit out of town relatives, my husband and I have to carry a 70-pound child up and down stairs in multi-story homes. I don't know if you've seen me, but I'm pretty little. His best day is when he wakes up and his back or legs don't hurt. Then he gets to invite a friend to the pool and have a swim buddy, followed by eating a big bowl of spicy pho at his favorite Vietnamese restaurant, or getting jungle curry at his favorite Thai restaurant. His worst day is when he wakes up with an achy back and sore legs, which makes him worry that he'll never get better and will always have Duchenne. I tend to get numerous calls from him on those days from the school nurse's office, and my husband and I can't always go pick him up due to work commitments, so he has to make it through the day. Lucas is currently in a clinical trial. We have been excited to see the number of clinical trials to have increased so much in the past few years, as has been mentioned today. The question has become not, can we get him into a trial, but which one? We work closely with his doctor to determine the way forward. Lucas is most excited about the gene therapy trials that have begun enrolling, and we have decided as a family to sit back and see how those go before pursuing gene therapy trial participation. Thank you for letting me share my story with you today.
Thank you, Carla. Amanda?
My name is Amanda Becker. I live in Newburyport, Massachusetts with my husband Mark and our 2 children. I've been in the Duchenne community for 12 years since my son was diagnosed at the age of 1. Jack loves science and hopes to work for NASA or engineer roller coasters. The message today from his 15-year-old sister is, someone fix this. The focus of my comments today is on transition. Transition is a euphemism for losing the ability to walk. In Duchenne, we have found a way to couch our words so that we can communicate with people outside of our community. We soften our words because expressing the true horror that is Duchenne is difficult, and it is difficult for others to hear. I'm not typically at a loss for words, but I have found this testimony very difficult to write. How does one sum up one of the most horrifying moments of Duchenne in 3 minutes? Loss of walking is a very raw time. It is an overwhelming time. It's an extreme event. It is something you know is coming, yet how do you prepare? It is standing on a beach watching an approaching tsunami wave. You know you can swim, but you have no idea the force with which you and all members of your family are about to be hit. The loss of walking can be a sudden or a gradual loss. It is harrowing both physically and emotionally. There are many bumps and sprains and fractures, and with every sprain and fracture, you wonder if it will be the last. With every fall, you remain calm, like, this is no big deal, but you also think of your friend's child who died suddenly after fatty embolism. You think of sudden, unexpected deaths that occur in Duchenne. In the time of transition, your son fights to keep walking, and you realize you really are fighting for your child's life. You vividly envision the complications associated with non-ambulation in Duchenne: scoliosis, respiratory failure, cardiac failure. As you envision what you know to be true, you tell your child, it will be okay. It's not okay. As I tried to find the words to share with you about this time of transition, the image in my mind is that of the sheer inundation by the tsunami wave hitting the shore, flooding a city, and people fleeing for their lives. While you try to prepare for this day, the world has not. Picking up the pieces after that wave is difficult, but you remember the devastating days of the diagnosis, and you pick up the pieces and go on again. You face a world where access to care is difficult and becoming severely more difficult. At 12, my son was able to walk independently for 3 to 4 minutes at a time. He fell while walking in his bedroom and broke his femur. Years of chronic steroid use has weakened his bones. When Jack collapsed and screamed in pain, I instantly knew his injury was serious. Sadly, Duchenne families become used to the thud from another room, which is the sound of their son hitting the floor. After recent ankle sprains, I feared a full recovery to walking would be very unlikely. Duchenne families struggle to find supportive care for this catastrophic illness. Medical crises are continual and resources are scarce. A friend who is an emergency room physician once said to me, "You need to realize that most ER docs don't know what to do with your son." Despite arriving that day at the ER by ambulance and the disclosure that femur fractures are very common at this age in Duchenne, our need for an X-ray was doubted. Further into the ER process, a well-intentioned physician gave my son a thorough knee exam, complete with pulling, pushing, twisting of his knee, diagnosing a torn ligament, without having looked at the X-ray. Transferring our injured son back into his wheelchair was a task that no one in the ER seemed to know how to do. Nonetheless, we continued to our major children's hospital. With input from our neurologist from afar, Jack was casted on a busy, stress-filled evening. We returned home in pitch darkness at 4 a.m, having absolutely no idea how we were going to manage. Our son was so weak, he was unable to even wiggle with the added weight of his full-length cast. He had no upper body strength to help pull himself up. The use of crutches was impossible. We left the hospital with no idea how to even help our son go to the bathroom. Not to criticize our local hospitals, but to say that good supportive care in Duchenne can be very hard to access. Providers had warned us it would be difficult to find help over the weekend, and it took 3 days for VNA service visiting nurses to call on us. The service was helpful, but I was disheartened to be discharged via text. The rehab hospital where we had attended therapies was unable to add the additional recovery appointments that my son needed due to staffing shortages and summer vacations. I remember begging at the appointment window, "Do you understand that without these appointments, my kid may never walk again?" Here we were with this traumatic, likely permanent loss, having to seek care with all new providers. My son's upper body and arm functioning also suffered greatly during this transition time, from which he will never recover. Thank you for your time and understanding the roller coaster that is Duchenne, and thank you for doing all that you can to help us end Duchenne.
Thank you, Amanda. Jessica?
Hello, my name is Jessica Carpenter, and I'm pleased and nervous to be chosen on this panel today representing PPMD and families like ours. I live about 2 hours away, just west of Richmond, Virginia, in a very rural community with my two sons, Wesley and Wyatt Grosclose. Wyatt is the youngest and not affected by Duchenne, but his physical ability was key in helping us confirm that something wasn't quite right with Wesley. Wesley is now 14, but from the age of 2, I had been telling his doctors there was something off with him. He could barely dress himself without groaning like an old man, couldn't ride a bike or climb the jungle gym like his younger brother could. Finally, in September of 2010, at the age of 7, Wesley had had enough and wanted to know why he was different from his friends, so he pleaded with his new general practitioner to look over him again. It took 5 years for someone to really listen to his symptoms. It was not 10 minutes into the appointment that the doctor wrote DMD on the script, and our lives have never been the same. Our journey from age 7 to 14 has not been an easy one, but we have been surrounded by great friends, doctors, and a community of other Duchenne families and advocates that make this road just a little bit more bearable. Not every day is easy, but we find joy and laughter in the oddest of moments. One of the biggest hurdles for me has been navigating the physical accommodations Wesley needs at both home and school, and ensuring that he has adequate, qualified personal care attendants. This becomes increasingly complex as I'm a single mom with a full-time job who spends her nights worrying how long his heart and lungs will stay healthy. I navigate nighttime repositioning in bed on my own, doctor's appointments, therapies, school accommodations, sick days that are too many to count, hours of time on the phone with insurance pushing for these therapies and medications to be paid for, and finding funds to pay for the items that aren't covered, like accessible homes and vehicles, bathing and mobility accommodations. Duchenne is a full-time job on its own for a caregiver. Wesley just recently learned that his body, as we phrased it, will not grow old. No parent should have to have this conversation with their child. It was heartbreaking. He walked away with a heavy heart, but grateful and blessed for the life that he does have before him. He has aspirations of graduating high school and becoming a small animal vet tech. And although I don't know how we're going to make that happen, we hope to be able to utilize the amazing assistive technology like speech-to-text and robotic exoskeleton arms, and we have faith that there will be even more advances in the future. At the end of the day, the most important priority has been making sure that Wesley is okay psychologically with our ever-changing new normal as his body starts to weaken. This is not easy on him. At an age where his peers are getting stronger and able to go further from their parents independently with ease, we find ourselves struggling to navigate a world that isn't designed for a 14-year-old in a 400-pound wheelchair whose muscles are slowly surrendering. Finding the resources to help overcome these barriers is not easy, and it takes significant time and ingenuity. Thank you for listening to our journey and for allowing me to represent my family and many like mine today.
Thank you, Jess. Lance?
Choice of mics here. I'm Lance Hester. I live with my wife Janelle and 2 high school-age sons in Gig Harbor. It's a small town in the other Washington. We're a decent team, having navigated Micah's Duchenne journey the last 15 and a half years. Anxiety is always a little higher than I'd wish. Hope fluctuates. And grieving is much different than I imagined. It's much slower, but it's much sneakier. Today I'm only sharing from the last 12 months of our journey. It's been a happy 12 months, but happy we've learned correlates with how much strategizing comes first. So today, with lots of strategizing and hindsight, I will list for you 5 ways Duchenne has impacted us during the first year of high school. The first way, 3 formerly complete strangers now have keys to our home. These are Micah's caregivers. The respite time is nice for Janelle, my wife, and these state-paid hands relieve us of the stuff that sometimes grinds your attitude: bathing, toilet papering. While strategizing Micah's future, we have learned the flow of increasing hours that you get over time and the pain of appealing for more hours if your track record doesn't support your needs. And I've been kicking around this community long enough to know that things aren't going to get any easier. So we take advantage of all the hours we can get. Now, I consider these 3 people gifts to Micah and our family, but they are so difficult to find, and they're so difficult to secure with a solid schedule. The second way that Duchenne's impacted us during this first year of high school is Micah's expensive drug cocktail. 1 year ago, I sat in this same exact room mortified by the unveiling of his workhorse drugs price tag. Strategizing began that moment. Just last month, our health insurance company finally approved it. This followed a spring and summer where I learned the probabilities of which insurers would and would not be covering it. We gave friends traveling to Europe Visa cards to bootleg some of the good stuff back to us just so that we'd make sure we had enough to last. And I worked with our health insurance broker to find a plan to save my family some of that $50,000 a year. If we remained on my law firm's old health plan, it would not be covered. Strategizing avoided switching drugs and placing Micah in a substandard care situation. But otherwise, the plan cost my firm more money, and my business partners, I think, are paying way more out of pocket than they used to. The stress of this disease hides in funny little places. The third way that Duchenne's impacted Micah's first year of high school, or our family's first year of high school, our next strategic move has Micah getting a new wheelchair this year. In the event we have to pay out of pocket, we figured we'd wait a few months until this calendar year when the insurance cycle starts over again. After the drug I mentioned exhausts our out-of-pocket maximum, we think, and we're trying to place us in a position where it does the minimal amount of damage to what we're going to have to pay out of pocket for any part of that we have to contribute to that chair. Now, fourth, high school. High school started in September. Micah's a 9th grader. I started Micah's high school journey last March. I began meeting with the principal to ensure the elevators would be working by fall, that the special ed room had all the right stuff and all the right amount of space, and to have the principal personally introduce me to the special education staff, and to see to it that he has the best one-on-one paraeducator looking out for him every minute of the day. It worked. We got our wish. Half of the day he's in regular education, half the day he's in special education. He's in leadership class with his big brother Braden, a senior. He eats lunch with the ASB president and 2 of the top football players in the league. And he also eats lunch with a couple cheerleaders. Which brings me to my next issue. 5th thing I'm going to mention about this year is forced puberty. We follow the care standards that PPMD's quarterbacked, and this, of course, includes steroids, 12 years of corticosteroids, and not surprisingly, the steroids stalled Micah's puberty. Well, we jokingly call it vitamin T, and that's his monthly testosterone shots. The shots yielded a lower voice, anatomical changes, and what I call immersion flirting. Suddenly, Micah began texting, FaceTiming, and even asking girls to school dances. This is so exciting and so fun for Micah. But think about this. All of Micah's attempts at charming Kay, Angelina, or Chelsea are always within a few feet of his 62-year-old paraeducator. Or how about this buzzkill, the ultimate 15-year-old freedom, Young Life summer camp, loud music, activities, bathing suits, sunshine, ice cream, And Micah's got Dad right there to put those night boots on and get him into his bunk at lights out. Although his friends, God bless them, did take turns feeding him. What's next? We've begun strategizing his next clinical trial. It will be his third such experience. It won't be a cure. In fact, it has a placebo component, but it could slow some of the inflammation. And he'll continue being a superhero in the future of strategizing defeating the disease.
Thank you, Lance. And Marisa.
Thank you. I'm Marisa Penrod. I'm from Michigan. I have 3 children, a daughter who is 22 and about to graduate from college, a son who's 18 in his freshman year of college, and a son who is 15 and a freshman in high school. My 15-year-old Joseph was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy when he was 5 years old. Over the past 10 years of living with Duchenne, Joseph has experienced a consistent and devastating loss of muscle function. Although he was never able to run or never able to ride a bike, he was able to walk until nearly 3 years ago. I didn't know that the agonizingly slow, deliberate steps he took on a nondescript day in June of 2015 would be his last, but they were. Since that day, we've managed to overcome many of the big hurdles, fighting our insurance company for a power wheelchair, figuring out how to purchase an accessible van, modifying our home with an accessible bathroom and bedroom. It's those big things that we anticipate and we hear most about, but it's the seemingly smaller hurdles, the ones we cannot yet fix, that continue to break our hearts. Joseph should not have to ask a friend to open his water bottle for him in the school cafeteria, but he does. He should not have to ask me to lift him into a shower chair or help him get dressed in the morning, but he does. He should not have to accept that he can not get his power chair into his friends' homes to hang out with them on Friday nights, but he does. My 18-year-old son should not have to worry about hurting his little brother when they roughhouse, but he does. My daughter should not have to lay with me in tears because she fears for the health of her little brother's heart and lungs, but she does. She should not have to call me from college in a panic several weeks ago because she needs to know from me how her little brother in a power chair would hide in a closet or under a desk if there was a shooter in his school. But she does. And I should not have to worry that my son is going to lose the ability to hug me, but I do, and it's close. So I grieve and I fear, but mostly now, I wonder. I wonder what small increases in muscle function would mean to Joseph. What if he could have maintained the ability to walk even a few steps so he could make it up into his friends' homes or continue to go to his grandma's house because he can still use a regular bathroom? What if he could continue to use his arms to hold a pen so for one more year he can keep the stats for the high school football team? I often wonder now if we'll have access to everything that Joseph needs. Currently, when we need help, we turn to our team of other parents and friends and school personnel and our insurance company, but there's a great lack of consistency among resources and available assistance. Availability of Medicaid waivers, special health programs, and insurance coverage varies from state to state and patient to patient. The attitude of schools and their interpretation of the ADA varies, and sometimes one student can experience varying degrees of support within the same school. In theory, this shouldn't happen, but in reality, there are very few standards, very little predictability in what answers and what support we'll get. This is challenging enough now, but I wonder what will happen when Joseph needs greater care. What about when my needs are greater? What if I were to get sick? I wonder what happens now if Joseph outlives me. We look to the future with hope and dreams and the potential for a longer life for our sons. We pray and we hope and we wish and we fight for something, anything that will save our sons or prolong their lives. and we are in fact at that point. Due to standards of care, science, and advocacy, the average life expectancy of a Duchenne patient has increased from the late teens to what we now say the mid-20s. But I believe in one of the most cruel twists of this disease. The incredible progress of a longer life comes with joy and relief, but also with fear, with the profound realities of what a longer life means in the world of Duchenne. My son is 15, and I am 50. If he celebrates 25, I'll be 60. I wonder, how does a 70-year-old care for their son who is no longer a boy, but an adult male with Duchenne? I've often thought that we do a poor job in our country of caring for our elderly and our disabled. But I wonder, what do families do when it is the elderly who are in fact caring for the disabled? We ache from the emotional toll of Duchenne, but we crumble from the practical toll, from the caregiving, the lifting, the showering, the dressing, the managing schedules for doctor appointments, the missed work, the lost financial resources, from the stretches and the fittings for equipment, and the phone calls to insurers for denials and appeals and more denials. When we say living longer, we have to remember that does not mean living longer without Duchenne. It means living longer with Duchenne, and we are still managing the manifestations of the disease. Will my son live longer but not be able to use his arms to feed himself? I wonder if my son will live longer but need full-time care. Will he have independence? Will my son live longer but struggle to find meaningful work? I wonder if there will be a treatment to help Joseph, but our insurance won't cover it. We must not be lulled into complacency by sound bites such as extended life or improved function. We absolutely deserve to celebrate, but these are incremental victories. We do not and can never have a singular goal in Duchenne. We must have a series of goals, and understanding that extending and saving lives does not mean that the work of our community or the work of any of you sitting here today is done. It is far from over. Duchenne is not a disease just about our boys. It is about families, it is about our schools, it is about our communities, and yes, it is about our country. The point at which my Joseph is, and the point at which we are in Duchenne, in this battle, this offers us a profound opportunity to express what we value, what we care about, and who we really are. Joseph wants to be a sportscaster. He wants to contribute, and he wants to be independent. Joseph has value. He has as much value as anyone in this room. He has dreams. So what I wonder about most now is if we will fight hard enough and make the choices and the progress in time to help him realize those dreams.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to have Ryan come back up and have everybody bring their voices into this conversation. This was really extraordinary testimony. Thank you, all of you. And we're going to do some polling with this age group. And maybe we all take a minute and applaud everybody who just laid it out there for us. And I'm also thinking I'd like each of you to run for office in your districts and the panel before, too. So, Ryan, why don't you start the polling and remind people the parameters for this panel?
Sure. So that was really amazing. I think it's important to do these polling sessions in between for us to take a break and breathe after these incredible testimonies, do some data gathering, and then get into the discussion. So for this session on polling, we are going to focus on those with children ages 11 to 17. So again, if you fall in this category, this is where you should be answering those questions. If you have a teenager present and you're comfortable with it and they ask your permission, they can also answer questions. But we're focusing again on that cohort. So with that, I think we can have the first polling question. Okay. So we're looking for, with a child or teen age 11 to 17, which symptoms have the biggest impact on your child's teen's day-to-day life? Choose 3 from this list. I'm going to give it a second for them to come through. We have people on the web. So I know it's hard sometimes to choose 3, but you want to think about right now on that impact to day-to-day life. So answers are still coming, and but we're seeing that fatigue continues to rate higher on these. I don't want to lead anybody with some of these choices, so I want the answers to come in. And then difficulty walking, learning and behavior, problems lifting arms above head, and all things we've seen in our qualitative data as well, and general interactions from families who give testimonies. So the end result here, fatigue rated very high here. And that was followed by the learning behavior, and then the functional ones of lifting arms above head and walking. Okay, let's move on to the next question, please. Okay, so for child or teen age 11 to 17, if a new treatment could help your child, which activities would be most important to preserve or maintain right now, choosing among the 3? So we're going to give it a minute for these to come through. And we certainly will see a wide range of responses because of the age range of 11 to 17. One of the advantages to us asking about the age of your child early on is when we look at the data, we're going to be able to see and analyze how they fall in under different age groups. So we see these answers continuing to trickle in. Just give it one more minute. So feed themselves right now is ranking the highest, followed by stand up from sitting in a chair, or actually walk around home. It's a tough thing about these surveys. They just ebb and flow over time. Ability to transfer self without help. Feed themselves remains the top choice. And that's followed by ability to transfer self without help. Okay. So we know more of these will come in the end. We'll have the full data set, but let's move on to the next question in the interest of time. Okay. Child aged 11 to 17, if a new treatment could help your child. I know this looks very similar to your last question, but here we're talking about more global health measures. So you're going to choose 3 from the list once again. Most important right now, if a new treatment could help your child. And is my volume better this time? Hopefully everyone can hear me. Up again? Sorry. Okay. Just give it a minute for these to trickle in. Means we have a lot of participation online as well, which is good. More energy, right, is ranking high, along with stronger heart and stronger breathing. Okay. Okay, so I think they're still coming in, but again, we're seeing stronger heart, stronger breathing, and more energy rating very highly among this list for global health measures. So let's move on to the next question. And this is a question for everybody in the room, okay? So this is something that impacts everybody, so we want you all to answer this question. This is dealing with concerns about behavior problems. Give these a minute to come in and then move on to the next question. Again, everyone can answer these questions. Somewhat concerned has the lion's share of results at 56%, so well over half of those reporting. And then very concerned, and then only among the 100%, a small percent saying not concerned at all. You can have the next question. Do you have concerns about learning at school for a person with Duchenne or Becker? It's more typical than someone their age. It's for everyone, I'm sorry. These next three questions, I apologize, are for everybody. So we're seeing somewhat concerned or very concerned, taking the majority of these responses. I know that they're still ebbing and flowing a bit in. But by far there is a level of concern among you all in terms of learning at school. Let's do the next question. Okay, so do you have concerns about depression or anxiety for the person with Duchenne or Becker that are more than typical for someone their age, unaffected? So we're going to give this a minute to come through. We're really seeing a vast majority rating the somewhat concerned or very concerned, taking the large majority of that response at 69%. This is something we are seeing and hearing in the community, and really trying to develop plans to work on these issues. And we'll be coming out with more details regarding some of these topics within our next annual conference. Okay. So I believe that finishes the polling for this panel. We're now going to get into the discussion panel that Annie will lead. So thank you.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go back to the discussion. And again, so this is open discussion for everybody who's in the room participating in the panel. And we, again, wanted to frame this so that the frame of reference is we're talking about the Duchenne journey between the ages of 11, 17, middle, high school. Okay? All right. So let's start by talking about navigating clinical care and clinical trial decision making. And we talked about that a little bit in the last session. So now let's talk about it thinking about this age group. So we can start here on the floor, wherever we see the hands go up first. So let's talk about what are some of the factors that we're taking into consideration and taking into account when we're thinking about selecting courses of treatment or participating in clinical trials. So what's getting stirred into those considerations? We've done a lot of work in our community around patient preferences and benefit risk. There are a lot of decisions, options we have now in our community around clinical trials. And there are a lot of different trade-offs to be considered around the therapeutic interventions. So Christine, and Amanda's coming to you. She's right beside you.
Hi, my name's Christine Piacentino. I live in Rochester, New York. My son is 24. He was diagnosed at 4. However, he started his clinical trial in the first Duchenne clinical trial when he was around 11, 12. And that caused us to really analyze, okay, are they gonna make us stop steroids? Because he's been on steroids for about since he was 5. So that was 10 years, and that was a while in steroids. And he was also in middle school. So the trial that I was able to join was in Utah. So I would travel literally across the country multiple times a month, multiple times a year. He was also in the MRI trial at the University of Gainesville. And, so we would do that travel. And as people said, as Angela said earlier, she made a decision sort of right off 2nd grade. Well, I had to make a decision, how's this gonna impact his school career and his long-term career plans and educational plans? Because missing that much school will clearly delay him. Now, we're very lucky, he's very bright. So he managed to catch up, but a lot of kids with learning disabilities and all of that, you know, you have to take that into consideration. It's a long haul, and we've been at this for 20 years, and like everybody on the panel, you strategize. Every step, every day, you look at what can we do to live our lives, make it better, but what's going to happen when we fall off that cliff? And there's a change that you're not quite prepared for.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Others? Yep, up here. Jessica? Yeah.
So, as I stated, I'm Jessica Carpenter, outside of Richmond, Virginia. My son Wesley's 14. As I stated before, I'm a single mom with one single income and a full-time job. And although my employer is completely accommodating and wonderful to me, I find it difficult to participate in clinical trials because I don't have enough paid time off to go to these across the country locations. I don't have the finances to get there. I don't have the time off of work. I have another son, so there's the issue of who cares for him while I'm gone, physically and mentally and emotionally. And there's that educational piece too. You know, Wesley does struggle at school and works very hard to be an AB student, but taking him away from school multiple times a month over the course of multiple years is going to delay his education.
Great, thank you. Yep, Carla, and then we have a hand up over here. Did you say? Okay.
So that kind of brought up something for me. So again, my name is Carla. My son Lucas is 12, and I live near here. And what this did for us is my husband was a consultant. We called him a Beltway bandit. He worked for a lot of different companies, but as a consultant in this area, it's pretty darn demanding. And he didn't have flexibility, so he chose to leave the private sector and join the federal government precisely because of our son's diagnosis and his desire to be more available. And case in point, when our son was 6 or 7, he was invited to take part in a very short, week-long clinical trial in LA. And thankfully, I didn't have the time off, but my husband was able to take paid leave because he worked for the federal government and was able to take our son.
Great, thanks. We have Claire over here.
I'm Claire. I'm from St. Louis, and Henry's been in 2 clinical trials so far. And some of the things that we really looked at were the safety data and what that indicated. That was a big factor for us, and as well as like proximity. Also, I can't think of the right word, but like, what is the drug? Is it an infusion? Is it a pill? How big is the pill? So those were factors for us. And he currently does weekly infusions, and that's been hard. And with that, we also are talking about port placement and all the things that come with that as well.
Okay, great. Do we have another? Okay, we'll do one last one over here, Ryan. Okay.
Hi, Ethan Marquez. My son's 12, Peyton. Whenever there's a clinical trial, we try our best to participate in every one that we can. They're extremely demanding. on the family, on our careers. And we basically, like everyone said, we make a calculated decision with our careers. My wife and I work for local government, so I have a lot of time that I can take off. She works in the private sector, and she can't take any time off. They will not be accommodating for her. So it's always a choice that we have to make. And it goes as far as I happen to work in law enforcement, and we are a 24/7 business. So I would stay on the early morning shift and work from 10 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning just so that I could attend the clinical trials, and I would go home, get a couple hours of sleep, and then pick up my son from school early and drive there, and I would nearly be falling asleep all the time because I just wouldn't sleep. And then I'd have to take him back and prepare everything, and then go to work again. So, but we try to participate in every single clinical trial as possible because we feel that it is beneficial for the community, and we want to help as much as we can and give back.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll do one more comment on this from Amanda.
I guess, Annie, thank you. Amanda Becker from Massachusetts, and Jack is 13. And I think the difference between this panel and the prior panel was the availability of clinical trials once your child becomes non-ambulatory. So for some of the newer folks in the room, your choices are very limited. Most of the trials revolve around a child's ability to walk, and once you lose that ability, there's really not many studies that are focused on the upper body functioning. One thing that I noticed as we just recently went through this difficult transition was the upper body weakness really was present and really progressive even prior to the loss of the walking. And I felt like even though we've participated in many studies and clinical trials, that is not necessarily captured as well as I would hope.
Great, thank you. So somewhat related to that, as you're thinking about treatment interventions, again, now focusing on the 11 to 17-year age range and the age of the boys and men in this age range, how much are, as parents, you engaging your children and these teens and men in the decision-making around the treatment interventions and or clinical trial participation? So can you talk about what those conversations sound like, how much you're talking to them about these considerations, the potential side effect profiles of the therapies, and then some of the other considerations we're talking about around missing school, activities, et cetera. So I see some head nodding here, so if you want to start, Marisa, and then we can go to those on the floor.
Marisa Penrod from Michigan. I think that at the age Joseph is, when he screened for a clinical trial, he had to actually sit through the consent meeting. So there's not really a question of, will he understand all the ins and outs of the trial? It's sort of how do you prep him for that? And how do you have those preliminary conversations so that when they talk about things like catastrophic side effects and the potential, of unknown effects, how do you sort of, get him ready for that? But I think it's, Joseph's in high school, so it's the age when in a lot of arenas of his life, I'm expecting him to take some accountability and some responsibility for homework. And Joseph's in a power chair full time, but he has chores. He's awesome at Swiffering when he holds it and whips around the house in his power chair. So it's kind of like, I just think of approaching life really fairly with him. If I'm going to have expectations for him in terms of a contributing member of the household, then he also deserves the ability to have input and also just to have really honest conversations. I think when our kids are younger, we have a certain fear about them trusting us, but as they get older, you really realize that it has to be a team and there has to be collaboration. And the only way to build that trust and that openness is to have the really tough, horrible, difficult conversations with them. So I would have to say that I feel like we have a lot of peace in our house. I don't feel like Joseph is overwrought with emotional concerns because we kind of do put it all out there. And then we also try to compare it to people who don't have Duchenne. I mean, we talk about death, and we talk about, everybody happens to everybody, and nobody knows what's going to come down the pike. So we just try to approach it as openly and, I guess, I don't know how you say positively, but positively as possible.
Okay, great. Lance?
And maybe on the other end of that spectrum, my son has a rare mutation, and I guess they're all to some extent rare, right? But super rare mutation, and he also has some cognitive delay. I don't know what you want to call it delay. He's just much lower learning level and comprehension level than kids of his age. And so he's got a very limited participation in those sorts of decisions. It puts a lot of burden on myself and Janelle to make decisions for not just his care, but also if he's going to be involved in a clinical trial and the risk analysis that goes into that. I think he inherently trusts us, and sometimes I think he, in hindsight, wished he didn't. He's had a lot of needle probes and pokings and missed veins and all those things that are really painful as you're going through those processes. But there are those of us, a large chunk of us in this world who have children who, for instance, I work in law, it's people who may not be competent to stand trial, if you were to assess their intellectual abilities, and so we have to step up to the plate and make very important decisions for them with the burden of doing so.
All right. Does anybody, let's do right next to Amanda, and then we'll come up.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Jorgensen from Ithaca, New York. Our son is 17, right here. I've come to find that talking about the clinical trials get more difficult over time because we have hope. And you have hope from the time you learn of their diagnosis at 2, and then they're 17, and you're still trying to dig for that hope. And one of the great things is all these new clinical trials. But you talk about them, and there's all these options that are coming. You have to be very specific about safety and everything else. But you also have to worry about nurturing that kernel of hope that you're trying to keep promoting in your family. And when you've gone to clinical trials and tried to perform some of the tasks, and your child falls just short of it, and he's like, well, why didn't I get a second chance? I would have tried harder. You have to be careful as you promote those next trials, because when you get to a certain point, you start falling short. You either walk too much or not enough. So where does that lead you in this current state of trials in this group? And I agree with Marissa and I agree with Lance. There's finding these compromises and trying to remain that hope, but find a clinical trial that will open just that door, open that window a little more to give other children a chance, both for the upper body and for those who are still walking and might be able to preserve some of that function enough to keep those daily life activities possible. So, that's what we're all looking for. And as we get to this point and to the stage after, we have to keep looking for these trials and hoping that they kind of move forward with us and our son's age. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela up here in the front, or Ryan. Yep.
Jack's 17. I'm Angela Knight from Colorado. Jack's 17, and his priorities have changed a lot, and he's been involved in choosing to participate or not participate in clinical trials many times. One he chose because his best friend could be part of the control group, and he wanted to be able to do things with his friends, and his friends wanted to be able to participate. So that was a really interesting thing. But what we're running into right now, recently was asked to rejoin an imaging trial. And I decided the best way to do that was to have the doctor who was asking talk directly to him if he wanted to rejoin. And they had their own conversation. And that what's interesting in the changes now is he's more focused on his college and his career than the medical side of it now. And so every question comes up is, how is this going to affect my AP studying? How is this going to affect my SAT prep class? How is this going to, and so I think through time, those things change and their priorities change, what they want to do and why. And for us right now, it's sort of all based on college and what, can I get into CU Boulder for mechanical engineering?
Mm-hmm.
And is this going to interfere with that? And I think that, he's been involved in these decisions, and it changes every time we have to think about it and make a decision.
That's great. Thank you, Angela. I think that's actually a nice segue into another question that we wanted to ask. And just to get a sense from the room, on average, how much time would you say per month, or if it's easier to answer, per week, would you say that you spend advocating for your child's healthcare needs? So that's attending medical appointments, speaking with insurers, appealing decisions, working with pharmacies, talking to durable medical equipment vendors. Kelly's hand went up really fast over there. Then Leandra over here next to you, Ryan, after Kelly. But just so we get a sense of just the time that you're spending doing that.
Great question, Annie. So my son stopped walking at 9.5. He's now 11. I thought he would still be walking by now. I think what is difficult for us to convey to payers is that when your child loses ambulation, the needs all of a sudden are just compounded. They don't just need a chair. They don't just, it's everything. They need all at once. And I can't tell you how much time I spend. If I were to guess, I would say right now it's probably 70% of my week is spent fighting. It's been 8 months since his power chair was ordered, and it was just approved 2 weeks ago. We still don't have it. So I think the most, we've heard this range of emotions that we deal with Duchenne. And up until now, none of those emotions for me were anger. And I'm angry about that. I'm angry that I have to constantly convince people that don't understand the disease in our effort to provide the best care for our children, that, it's a very devaluing process. There's nothing worse than knowing you're trying as a mother to provide your child with the best equipment, the best care to keep them healthier longer, to constantly be told, no, he doesn't need that. No, you need a less deluxe model. It's a constant process, and it has to change. I think so many times we just accept it as part of, our lives, and until you stop and think about it, why are we constantly convincing these payers of what our children need?
That's great. Thank you, Kelly. And then we have someone with the microphone, and we'll come back up. So did you just give it to Leandra? Why don't you Leandra had her hand up for who has a microphone? Leandra. This is where the wheels come off the cart. Leandra.
Hi.
To the panel. We were doing so well.
I'm Leandra Archdeacon. My son's 11, multi-diagnosis. So back to that main we have to make calls all day, every day. I had to quit my job just to handle the phone calls. I used to work in dental surgery. I can't stop and, say, sorry, I can't hand you your instrument. I got to go take a phone call. It got really difficult. So you have to learn to balance, and it's not easy. So we dedicate one day each week where all day, that whole day, I am making phone calls. I'm scheduling, and the rest of the week, those are therapy days. Those are appointments. And during that week, I'm going to have to take phone calls. I'm going to have to answer text messages. It's constant. It's all day. It doesn't ever end. To add the hours, it's 24 hours. It's constant care. It's long. So that's
Thank you.
that.
Right. Marisa?
Well, I want to piggyback on what Kelly was saying, because I think there's a continuation of her story that I think is critical that we bring up and is on the record here. So when we talk about advocating for our kids, let's just use let's use Kelly's wheelchair as an example, Jackson's wheelchair that she brought up. So when you think about that, it was approved 8 months ago and he still doesn't have it. And Kelly's battling, she's fighting the good fight. So let's remember, she's not fighting because, he wants spinners on the wheels or he wants a custom color or, something special. It's medically necessary. So she's fighting for something that's medically necessary. And as these things are in limbo and somebody's, making decisions or not making decisions, our boys are losing function and they're at risk. And they're losing function that they will never, ever regain. And they're at risk. So when you talk about a young man who needs a power chair, that's not just a convenience. Jackson needs that power chair for back support, a custom molded seat. 8 months without that as his muscles are deteriorating, now you're looking at a young man who could be facing scoliosis and ultimately spinal rod surgery. So the conversations need to become, do you want to delay that? You want to hold that up? Then you're looking at a way bigger medical expense and catastrophic health issues for the child down the road. So we're not just fighting the good fight because we're all tenacious and we don't have anything else to do. It's not just about the equipment, it's the equipment directly impacts the health of our sons, and I think that's super critical that we're talking about that.
Excellent, thank you. Amanda, and then we'll do Jessica.
And Annie, on that note, and I agree with both of you, that we need to be reminded that the folks who have found their way to Washington and found the strength to advocate are probably representing only 5 or 10% of the families out there, that you have a lot of strong advocates in this room, that there's a lot of families out there that just, they're a lot worse off than we are. So when you have the strongest advocates fighting for what they need for 8, 10 months at a time and still coming up short, still not getting the features that they need in these power wheelchairs, I just want to remind that you're talking pretty strong advocates here.
Yeah, yep. And Jessica?
And I'm just going to piggyback on what the other ladies have said, is we got a flu diagnosis last Monday, and I'm watching Wesley cough and cough and cough and cough and be achy and hurt. And I'm being told that he's not sick enough for, the word is gone now. Oh, thank you, a cough assist. I'm watching him in tears because his lungs are deteriorating because he's coughing so much, and the payer is telling me he's not sick enough.
Okay, let's do one, do you have one more back there?
Perlita Haynes.
Is the mic on?
Perlita Haynes. My son Levi is 11. I'm from Pennsylvania. As far as the hours, I mean, it's so difficult to convey the time it takes to do all this. I mean, Levi is transitioning right now. So 6 months ago, a year ago, maybe 10, 12 hours a week that we're kind of advocating for him. But whoa, in 3 months, it's turned into a full-time job.
Yep.
It's tough.
Yep. Okay. So we're going to do one last question for the panel. And then we're going to pivot a little bit and ask you your son's perspective on something, because we're sort of going to, and we'll pick up on the themes that we talked. We clearly hit some really important themes, and I hope you're noticing that we're kind of threading these themes through all of the panels. So we'll have an opportunity to circle back to some of these themes again in the other panels today. And we clearly hit some really important themes in that last question, and those will pick up again as we go out throughout the day. But I'd like to ask, from your perspective, what do you consider your sons to be the most excited and hopeful about now as they're starting to look towards their futures and considering career options?
2 words, gene therapy.
All right.
That's what he asked our doctor about directly. So.
Okay, great. Amanda?
We've just been through this rough transition time, so I have to be honest that it is really a very rough time. His biggest hope right now is that I can complete a bathroom renovation and he can have a roll-in shower.
Okay.
At 13.
Again, another rough transition. He did find out, he's not going to grow old just recently. So we're still trying to take the weight of that world off his shoulders. But I think what he's probably most looking forward to is how to navigate a career as an adult. How do I work with small animals when I can't lift my hands above my head, but it's a passion of mine, so we have to figure it out.
You know, that part of our strategizing for Micah is just, it's kind of in its infancy. We had his IEP meeting a couple months ago at school, and his vice principal, is just a wonderful woman, said to Micah, what do you want to do when you're done with high school? And for him, that might mean when he's 21, we'll see, as long as they'll allow him there. And he looked over at Janelle and I, and he said, I want to either live with Landon, that's his buddy, as a roommate, or I want to live with mom and dad. And fine, he can live with me as long as he wants, but it has just sort of begun, I've begun just barely scratching the surface of, career opportunities, or, how do you navigate continuing to get all the benefits you're going to need for the high level of care you're going to need, and not make too much money, and not be bored, not feel like you're just killing time, but to also have a very socially, engaged experience. And I'm kind of overwhelmed by it right now, so I don't really have an answer.
Okay. Marisa?
You said what is Joseph most looking forward to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Joseph really is, we have big struggles, and being non-ambulatory comes with a whole separate set of baggage, but he is incredibly positive and happy, and he doesn't really think much about being in that power chair right now. Joseph's on student council. He was the homecoming court representative for homecoming for the freshman class. He's just like literally plowing through life, and he plans on going to college. And that's what he's planning for. He studies and talks about it, and he wears all his Michigan State gear because he's a huge Spartan, even after the Big Ten basketball loss this weekend. So he's really just looking forward to that, and we don't really talk too much in depth about beyond, what's down the road, which is kind of sometimes a healthy lesson in sanity for all of us, is just kind of looking at like, what's the next step, not what's 10 years from now. So yeah, Joseph's going to college. He's not hoping to, Joseph's going.
All right. That's right. Great. Well, let's hear it for this panel. Thank you, and all of you.